The first batch of Marine Corps conscripts under Taiwan's new one-year system starts basic training. The families of Chinese fishers killed in a recent capsizing near Kinmen are headed back to China unsatisfied.
船明明是被装翻的，没有人来承担责任，连一句最简单的道歉都没有，我们心里很难过。
Australia hosts a meeting of the ASEAN bloc as it looks to strengthen its investments and ties in the region. Plus,
here in Japan's Kumamoto, a coffee shop is one of the few offering a special bean from abroad, from Taiwan.
a warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Betty Chen. Taiwanese officials are going back on plans to resume group tours to China. Authorities say that lifting Taiwan's ban would negatively affect domestic tourism. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council, which oversees relations with China, says it has not ruled out allowing group tours to China, but it says it will only do so if China lifts its restrictions in return, which is unlikely given the current tensions between the two sides.
基本上他们是要认为说现在这个时间点不愿意谈，所以应该涉及到他们内部的整体政治情势的评估了。
A military base in southern Taiwan is accepting its first batch of one-year conscripts. Bryn Thomas looks at how they're being trained to be Marines.
Ranking up, Taiwan's Marine Corps is processing its first batch of 155 recruits since the country reinstated one-year conscription. These young men will undergo 8 weeks of basic training before becoming Marines.
很开心啊，会往这方面继续努力。
Taiwan extended mandatory military service back in 2022, from 4 months to 1 year. It's part of an effort to strengthen the country's defenses amid growing aggression from China, which continually threatens to invade Taiwan. That's why Taiwan's Marine Corps wants to make sure its conscripts get the training they need.
期许一男能够顺利完成训练及考核。
为了提供训员们有更完善的照顾，将以同理心为出发点，体恤以及关怀各位训员们的生活起居。
Taiwan's military says it plans to use conscripts in support roles, backing up and supplying frontline professional soldiers. But with increasing tensions in the Taiwan Strait, ensuring they're well-trained is an absolute necessity. Chen and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's Defense Ministry says it's monitoring a U.S. warship that transited the Taiwan Strait on Tuesday. The USS John Finn sailed northwards towards Japan in what the U.S. Navy says is a routine freedom of navigation exercise. Transits by warships from the U.S. and its allies through the Taiwan Strait often anger Beijing, which views both the waters and Taiwan as part of its own territory. It is the second time a U.S. warship has transited the Taiwan Strait this year. This recent Taiwan Strait transit comes just a day after China announced it would increase military spending by 7%. But are these two events linked? To find out, our reporter Jaime Okan spoke to Brian Hart, a security analyst with the China Power Project at CSIS in Washington, D.C.
Brian, I want to first ask you about this transit in the Taiwan Strait by the U.S. Is this transit timed in any way with the two sessions meeting that's happening right now in Beijing?
Yeah, so I think broadly, this transit, these are the U.S. Navy describes these as routine. I believe this is the second one that's happened this year. And, generally sometimes these are in response to specific things. I think right now it's probably not a response to anything that's going on in Beijing with the two sessions. I think it's in response to China's assertiveness around Kinmen in recent weeks in response, their Coast Guard sailing in waters around Kinmen after the death of two Chinese fishermen. So I think that's largely in response to this.
At this summit, this two-session summit, China announced it's going to be increasing defense spending by 7%. Is that a lot? And what does that mean for Taiwan's military?
The figure that they put out was 7.2% growth. And that's pretty much exactly in line with what we saw last year as the official growth rate and pretty much in line with what we've seen in the last several years of growth rates around the high single figures. And so I think for me, this just shows continued steady investment in the PLA, which is significant, I think, given some of the economic constraints China's on, in terms of slowing GDP, but also sluggish housing market and all the various other structural factors China's facing. So I think it shows that there's continued prioritization of the PLA with Xi Jinping caring about military modernization. I expect we'll continue to see that. One of the signs I look for is, if China faces a really prolonged and sharp economic slowdown, more severe than what we're seeing now, you may see more of that kind of guns versus butter debate in terms of how they invest. We're not seeing that yet. We're seeing them continue to, prioritize pretty steady investment.
Given this increase in defense spending from China, what does this mean for Taiwan and the other countries in the Indo-Pacific region?
I mean, this is just another year of continuing shifts in the balance of power. China now outspends Taiwan and all of its other neighbors by a huge margin. Last we looked, the best, I think, kind of figure we have is that China spends more than the next 17 countries in the region combined. Still less than the United States, but significantly more than all of its neighbors. And so I think that's a worrying sign for Taiwan, but also for Japan and Korea and India, countries that have tense relations with Beijing. And we do see these countries starting to invest more in their own defense and to start investing in some of their alliances with the United States and other partners in the region in response to Beijing's growing power.
That was Jaime Khan speaking to Brian Hart, a security analyst with the China Power Project in Washington, D.C. Hungary has signed off on Sweden's bid to join the NATO military alliance. Hungary is the last of the bloc's members to back the expansion, ending a year and a half of delays. New countries need unanimous support among NATO members to join. Sweden will join 29 other European NATO members, abandoning its long-standing neutrality after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Sweden's defense minister has welcomed Hungary's approval.
Att det är oerhört positivt och att vi nu förhoppningsvis kommer att bli medlemmar, och jag tror inte det handlar om veckor utan det handlar förhoppningsvis om dagar. Och det kommer att vara bra för Sverige och det kommer att vara bra för NATO. Det kommer att vara bra för stabiliteten i hela det euroatlantiska området att Sverige kan bli en fullvärdig medlem av NATO.
Back in Taiwan, it's been 3 weeks since the deadly capsizing of a Chinese fishing boat near the country's Kinmen Islands. The case is still unresolved, and family members of 2 Chinese fishers that died are calling for Taiwanese authorities to take responsibility. Tiffany Wang has more.
Praying for their loved ones' souls. These families from China are in Taiwan's outlying Kinmen Islands to say goodbye to their deceased relatives. They were among 4 Chinese fishers on board a vessel that overturned when it encountered Taiwan's Coast Guard 3 weeks ago. The incident is being investigated, and the Coast Guard maintain they are not to blame for the Chinese boat capsizing. But the families of the 2 Chinese fishers that died disagree with that version of the story.
船明明是被撞翻的，没有人来承担责任，连一句最简单的道歉都没有，我们心里很难过。
These family members of the deceased came to Kinmen 2 weeks ago to identify the bodies and speak with prosecutors, who have been unable to determine who is at fault for their deaths. The Coast Guard, which says the Chinese speedboat overturned while escaping inspection, offered condolence money, but the families refused.
我们就是各给10万块，跟原本谈的抚恤金是不一样，不一样。这纯粹是我们对家属的一个抚慰的一个心意而已。我们是希望说透过红卫来转交。
It's been nearly a month since the 2 fishers died, aggravating tensions in the Taiwan Strait. China claims Taiwan as its own, and there have been no official talks between the 2 sides for years, as Beijing refuses to speak with Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party. And now, Chinese representatives from the Shenzhou Taiwan Affairs Office are blaming Taiwan's ruling DPP for the lack of closure.
台湾方面参加协商人员已于3月3日离开金门。 至今没有返回，毫无音信，充分表明民进党当局没有解决问题的诚意，由此造成的后果由民进党当局负责。
But Taiwanese officials say they want to continue dialogue with Chinese representatives to resolve tensions in the strait.
倒没有所谓破局啦，我想有进展的，也有没有进展的嘛。双方应该各自回去检讨一下，请示一下。
But without an agreement on what occurred with the Chinese fishing vessel in the strait, responsibility and reparations for the incident seem far away, leaving the families of the deceased still searching for answers. Alex Chen and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's labor minister has apologized for a remark about Indian migrant workers some say was racist. John Finn has this report.
Labor Minister Xu Ming-chun appears at Taiwan's legislature. Lawmakers want an explanation. In a recent interview, Xu said Taiwan's plan to bring in Indian migrant workers will be limited to those from northeastern India. Her reasoning sparked accusations of racism.
不管在肤色、饮食习惯，都跟我们比较相近。然后不管在这个制造、营造或农业方面，都是他们擅长的强项。
Taiwan's foreign ministry has apologized for what it called Xu's inappropriate language and said that Taiwan will welcome Indian workers of any background as long as they meet job requirements. But that hasn't quelled anger, including among lawmakers. Huang Ren, an indigenous Taiwanese lawmaker who represents an indigenous constituency, had this to say.
肤色不同，就是潜在的内心里面就已有歧视的。
But the labor minister says there was no racist intent behind what she said.
我真的没有任何歧视的意思。其实我是肯定印度移工他们的素质跟工作能力的表现，或许发言不够精准，有造成外界的误解。这个部分我会来检讨。那我昨天也对这样的一个造成一个纷扰误解，我也表达歉意。
Whatever her intentions, advocates for migrant workers in Taiwan say her choice of words reflects racist attitudes that do exist in Taiwan society, and that racism is a problem migrant workers in Taiwan do face.
有部分台湾民众可能会去认同这件事情，因为就说刚刚有说到，就是有些观念上的歧视啊，或观念上的一些文化差异、肤色差异、语言差异，还是会让台湾人造成一些刻板印象。
It's unclear how the labor minister's apology will go down in India, a country the government has worked to draw closer to as it works to boost relations with Taiwan's southern neighbors. But it puts plans to open up a new source of imported labor on an awkward footing before they are even finalized. Luffy Li and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up after the break, see how scientists from Taiwan and Florida are teaming up to save vulnerable coral reefs.
We will have outplanted resilient coral genotypes that can turn the tide on the potential extinction of coral, and we can save the rainforest of the sea for future generations.
At a time when the world feels more divided, a platform for diverse voices to come together. I'm Divya Gopalan. Join the dots. Be part of the conversation. Connected where opinions matter.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. 9 Southeast Asian leaders have joined hundreds of diplomats, academics, and officials in Melbourne for the ASEAN-Australia Special Summit 2024, as Canberra looks to expand its influence in the region. Rosie Gredinger reports.
Leaders of Southeast Asian countries holding hands in a show of solidarity as members of the ASEAN bloc of nations meet in Australia. It's the third day of the summit where Southeast Asian powers are discussing maintaining peace and prosperity in the region. Today, host Australia has made its support clear, saying building connections with Southeast Asia is key to the nation's future.
Australia is fully committed to cooperating with you within the framework of ASEAN and through crucial bodies like the East Asia Summit and APEC. I hope that you leave Australia with a deeper understanding of Australia's commitment to our region and our optimism for its future. Our understanding that more than any other part of the world, Southeast Asia is where Australia's destiny lies.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese yesterday unveiling an economic program worth more than $1.3 billion US, encouraging more investment in Asia and bringing more jobs to Australia. And today announcing more than $40 million to bolster educational links with the region. Trade and investment are a major focus on this week's special summit in Melbourne, held to mark 50 years since Australia became ASEAN's first dialogue partner. But more contentious issues, including tensions in the South China Sea, also loom large. A flare-up of those tensions seen yesterday, when Chinese Coast Guard carrying out dangerous manoeuvres led to a collision with a Philippine ship. China also using water cannons to smash through the front window of the Philippines Coast Guard vessel. That's drawn strong condemnation from Australia, the US, members of the EU and the Philippines. But some leaders have played down the situation, saying it can be managed and outside countries should not weigh in.
The positions we take on those claims are different depending on where we stand, and Singapore takes no position on the claims, but we have a strong view on international law and on freedom of navigation, which we have stated many times. You can look it up, and it has not changed.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese today met privately with ASEAN members before leaders attended a retreat in Melbourne's Government House. Although ASEAN nations maintain varying positions, the summit will end with a joint statement on behalf of all countries involved, expected to address territorial disputes in the South China Sea and the conflict in Gaza. Devon Tsai and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
For more on the ASEAN meeting in Australia, reporter Chris Gorn spoke with Raman Yakob, a research fellow at the Lowy Institute in Sydney.
So start by telling us, what's the significance of this meeting for Australia?
What is important is that we could see agreements signed between ASEAN and Australia on many areas, for example, on trade, clean energy, and maritime cooperations. So it signals Australia's recognition that its fate is tied to the region. And I was at the summit and spoke to several Southeast Asian officials there, and generally they are impressed with the efforts put in by Australia to engage the region in the summit.
Australia has announced some pretty hefty investments into the region during this meeting. Tell us, what's motivating them to strengthen ties in this region?
When we look at geography, that is one key factor. Australia is geographically located close to the region. Its maritime domain is linked with the security of maritime Southeast Asia. 99% of Australia exports is transported by the sea, and about 78% of Australian petroleum needs are also exported or imported by the sea. So there is a need to ensure that Southeast Asia in general, especially in the maritime domain, is stable and secure. And significantly, ASEAN economy is now more than 2 times that of Australia. So just beyond these security issues, it makes sense for Australia to be engaged with ASEAN so that it can attain economic benefits from Southeast Asian economic strength.
Obviously, there have been recent clashes between the coast guards of the Philippines and China in the South China Sea. What's your sense about how concerned the ASEAN countries are about this issue?
Even for ASEAN member states like Singapore, who does not have any claims in the South China Sea, the Singaporean government is concerned that the Chinese behavior will disrupt freedom of navigation. And for Singapore Defence Minister to state that, it signals some concerns. Because typically Singapore's government is quite careful about making statements regarding strategic situations in the region.
Do you expect them to address the South China Sea dispute publicly, such as in their joint statement at the end of the meeting?
I think some ASEAN member states are a bit cautious about that because Chinese investment, Chinese trade is critical for their economic survival. So I would foresee if there's a joint statement between Australia and ASEAN on the South China Sea, it will be a bit tempered, it will be a bit constrained. And similarly, with regards to the crisis in Myanmar, any ASEAN-Australia joint statement on that crisis will also be tempered with, because ASEAN operates on consensus decision-making and they have to take into considerations the opinions and policies of all its member states.
Is there anything else you're going to be watching for or found interesting about this meeting so far?
I think for now, we have seen at the bilateral level, I think Singapore Prime Minister has welcomed the Australia to deploy AUKUS submarines in the future to Singapore military bases. So that's something which is quite significant, and it's a very loud and clear statement that some ASEAN members have embraced AUKUS.
That was Lowy Institute research fellow Raman Yakob speaking with TaiwanPlus reporter Chris Gorin. Doctors in Japan say they've carried out the world's first double organ transplant using living donors. Kyoto University Hospital says it transplanted parts of the lungs and liver to a 10-year-old boy taken from multiple family members last November. The operation involved 4 operating rooms and took 18 hours. The boy was discharged from the hospital last week after he could walk again on his own. Both organ donors have also safely returned home. Health authorities have identified 2 new measles cases in New Taipei. The 2 people crossed paths with the previously identified patients and later developed symptoms like rash, fever, and fatigue. 6 cases have now been recorded this year, the most in 4 years. Health officials say the outbreak should peak before April. The government is working on getting health workers vaccinated. Authorities are urging people in northern Taiwan to remain on high alert as measles is highly contagious and has a long incubation period. Alishan is world famous for its tea, but a lesser-known treat is Alishan coffee. A cafe owner in Japan has added the premium Taiwanese bean to his menu in Kumamoto, just as ties between Taiwan and Japan are at a historic turning point. Joyce Zeng reports.
Drawing out the smells and tastes of faraway places through coffee. Ichimi Yujiro has been perfecting his craft, roasting and brewing coffee from around the world here in Kumamoto, Japan, learning from a veteran pro, his dad, Ichimi Yojiro. Their family-owned coffee shop has now passed down 3 generations, and a new brew they've been excited to share with customers is this little-known bean from Taiwan.
抽油した時の香りはとても酸が目立つんですけれども、少し南国系のフルーツのような香りが取れます。
Ichimi Yujiro says people usually talk about Taiwan's Alishan tea, but rarely Alishan coffee. The premium beans are known within the coffee community, but because not many are harvested each season, they're limited and expensive, especially to ship overseas. Ichimi Yujiro and his father say despite the price, getting Alishan coffee here is worth it, as they strive to offer the world's best coffees to people in Kumamoto. The southwestern prefecture has been transforming over the past couple of years, as Taiwanese chip giant TSMC opened its first Japanese fab here, bringing in billions of dollars and hundreds of Taiwanese people. Ichimi Yojiro says the timing of TSMC's arrival alongside them adding Taiwanese coffee is a total coincidence.
TSMC のことは全く知りませんでした。私の女房かなえのお母さんのお母さんが台湾に行ってたの。台湾に住んでたの。で、こっちに日本に帰ってで料理の味付けが台湾の味付けとかとても好きだったわけですよね。だからとても台湾は身近に感じてたし、それがコーヒーということでもっとマッチした。
A longtime fan of Taiwanese culture, Ichimi Yojiro has also hosted screenings of Taiwanese movies at his shop, with the biggest event drawing 120 people. Now, with the growing Taiwanese community in Kumamoto, both father and son are excited to keep the cultural exchange going.
台湾の方と熊本をつなげる一つのアイテムになってくれたら、とても幸せなこと、光栄なことです。
Ichimi Yujiro hopes Kumamoto's expanding community will be an inclusive one. And as he says, what better way is there to get to know someone than over a delicious cup of coffee? Joseph Wu and Joyce Zhen in Kumamoto, Japan for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan is surrounded by coral reefs, but they're in danger. A new partnership with scientists in the U.S. is hoping to change that. Harrell Hughes reports.
Coral reefs. They make up only a small percentage of the ocean, but are home for more than a third of all marine species. Healthy reefs are colorful and thriving, but even a small change in the environment, and they turn into this, white and barren. This is called coral bleaching. and happens when the ocean's temperatures get too warm. It's a global issue, and marine scientists are doing what they can to stop it. A team in the US spent years testing different types of heat-resilient coral, and now they are sharing that knowledge with Taiwan.
We will have outplanted resilient coral genotypes that can turn the tide on the potential extinction of coral, and we can save the rainforest of the sea for future generations.
Bleached coral is not dead and can be revived, most effectively through transplants. Reefs grow in nurseries, and when they're strong enough, they're transplanted to damaged areas. Nearly all the reefs in southern Florida were bleached in 2023, when ocean temperatures hit record highs. The Florida team focused on heat-resilient coral, with a success rate of more than 70%. And Taiwan is interested in trying the same. Taiwan is surrounded by coral reefs, and they have been in the danger zone for several years now. Scientists from Taiwan and Florida are now working together with the goal of restoring 10,000 corals in the next 3 years, so that Taiwan's surrounding reefs will no longer be bleached and lifeless and can return to being a thriving ecosystem. Andy Xue and Harrell Hughes for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Finally, check out this art exhibition in London featuring Lego versions of some of the world's most famous masterpieces. I'm Betty Chen. Take care and see you next time.